So next we've got Jo Roach from Makey Lab, who's going to tell us about how she's changing the world, one doll at a time.
Hey. So, the mood will change slightly because we're going to talk about dolls. What I'm going to do is talk to you about what I'm doing right now. I'm not going to focus on any of the back history, and explain to you why I'm standing here holding two dolls. These four people got together in 2011, which was about 2 years ago now, and we'd been working in TV, in radio, in games, and we all had kind of been working in telling stories, and so most of us have been making products for young people. And Alice Taylor and I worked at Channel 4, and we were producing interactive products for kids and teenagers, kind of helping them learn about various things that were non-curriculum. And she came to me and said, I've had an idea. She used to have an avatar company. And she said she'd been to the toy fair, and on one floor she'd seen lots of kind of physical toys, things that you hold in your hand. And then in the basement she'd seen all of these interactive projects, but there was no crossover. And she said, I think there's a space opening up for toys and games that kind of merge together. And then she started talking to me about 3D printing. I don't know how much you all know about 3D printing, but it's essentially taking a 3D model from a computer and making it into a real thing like this. And she said, why don't we do printable avatars? Why don't we create games that create toys that feed back into games, and try and do that? So I thought, okay, that sounds like a mad idea. So we went off and we tried to make our first doll, because dolls are the biggest sector of the toy industry. So we made this, which is basically I think there's 24 pieces to it. It's a doll that clicks together. It was something that we designed online, sent to someone that we found on the internet who could model, and said, can you make this work for us? And this is what they sent back. So what was interesting for us is that to develop a toy and put it out is normally something that takes about 3 or 4 years. So traditional toy companies like Mattel and Hasbro will spend 3 or 4 years developing a toy, a doll, and then eventually they will put it out after lots and lots of research, and it can cost millions of pounds. And we spent 6 months with a team of 6 just trying to work out, how do we do this? So we got a little bit of money from the government, a little bit of money from friends and family, and we worked it out really quickly, and then we just put it out there. And we said, what do people think of this? Do you like it? And we sold 100 in 3 weeks, which was quite surprising because they were very expensive. They were £99. And I think that was a shock for us as much as it was for everybody else. Okay, we can do the manufacturing. How do we pull this into all of the knowledge we've got about making products for kids, about telling stories? How do we explain to people why it's so special? Actually, I'll stay on this slide for a little bit. And so the thing that is special about these dolls, about Makey dolls, is that everyone is completely unique. So you design everything from the neck up. And so your doll is completely customizable and will be the only one in the world. And that's really completely different, because when kids get toys that aren't Makeys, they're all the same. There are a couple of models out there, like American Girl, where you can choose from one of 40, but this is all about bringing creativity to toys. So actually getting kids and adults to design their own toys. So that makes them really special. And the other thing that we really like about it is that the model of the toy industry is that you come up with this idea, you push it out after 4 or 5 years, and then you spend millions of pounds marketing, you get the toys made in China, and then you ship them wherever they need to be sold around the world, you warehouse them, and then off they go. And the thing about these toys that we liked, and another reason why we set this up, was that they're printed on demand. So you go to the website, and you see this, and you, I think there's a, you use the little sliders, and you completely design the toy yourself. You give it a little story, so you can kind of see where we're going with this. It's all about getting the kids to decide what it's called, what its story is, what it loves, what it hates. This one is me, that I created last night. And so you don't have tons of waste. You don't have millions of products being shipped around the world that you're not sure if people want them. You have a toy that you've designed that is sent to you within 2 weeks, something that you can create this story for. And the way that they're created means that they're very sustainable, because the powders that's not used go back into the next print. So it's a very sustainable model. And it also means that we can print them locally. So if you want one in Italy or in America or in Holland, if there's a printer there, you can send the file, and there you go, they're all printed. So the thing that really surprised us was we launched this, we put it out after 6 months. And that's really, we thought, okay, that's kind of a large part of the story, but that's actually where the story began, because we knew that the first sort of 50 would go to friends and family, which they did. So all of our friends piled in and said, I want one, and they went. And then we started seeing names of people we didn't know in Russia, in Iceland, in America, in South America, in New Zealand, and we thought, oh, this is really interesting. Like, now it's starting to spread out of our network and into places that we just didn't know that it would go, right at the beginning with no marketing. Ooh. Sorry, damaging your mic. And so this is just one of the dolls that we've got a very active forum, and so there are people on there constantly making things. So this is one of the dolls that we got a picture of. And we started to find that the development, in terms of how we were approaching it, was going to change even more. So the people who were buying them were co-developing with us. So this particular doll, we were trying to work out skin colors. How do you do skin colors on dolls in plastics? It was something that the hardware manufacturers didn't know. We didn't know, so we were boiling them in tea, we were boiling them in onions, we were trying to make them yellow, we were trying to make them brown. And one of our users sent this and said, I've done it. And then put a whole tutorial on our website saying, this is how I dyed my doll, this is how I got this deep brown. There were some other interesting developments. So we got this one, and there was some really cool stuff that people were doing. So we'd made it possible for if you take the head off, to slide a little Arduino in the back of the head, but that's as far as we'd gone. There was a tiny hole in the neck, and then in the back there was room for batteries, but we didn't have time to develop any electronics, so we just said, look, we've done this, see what you want to do with it. And we got a video back of a girl who, Kat her name was, who had put batteries in the back, put ears on top, and when you made noises, the ears moved. We had another one where it had a sensor in the head, Blobo, so as you were kind of moving the doll, they'd hooked it up to a Wii, and it was basically acting as a Wii controller, so the Makey was running through the game. So all this stuff was happening, and it was interesting because I'd seen when I was working in interactive with TV and radio that things were changing and that you were getting a feedback loop, but we were still quite surprised at how strong that was with a physical product and how we were kind of racing to keep up with the developments of the people who had these dolls. And they were also really forgiving, so there was some nervousness when we were putting a product out there that the joints weren't quite right, that they might get floppy and wouldn't stand, various things that we were nervous about. And because we kind of gave it an alpha title and said, look, this is in development, we're going to co-develop with you, the audience were really forgiving. And when we put out a questionnaire, very recently and said, what do you think of the Makies? Would you buy another one? Would you recommend them to your friends? 96% said, yes, I would recommend it to my friend, despite the kind of teething problems that we had. And I think there was a certain sense of ownership, sort of co-ownership with the product, because it wasn't just us saying, we've made a thing now that you've got to have it. It was kind of, well, actually, we want this and we want that, and we were responding to that. So one of the things that we said a lot right at the beginning was, we want your feedback. We want to know what you want. There were so many directions that we could go in. Would we go for the electronics, activity? Would we develop the game? And people were asking for all of these different things. So we started responding to some of them, some of the really easy, quick things that we could do. So on our forum, we had a bunch of collectors say, we want to root hair in the skull cap. Can you do that for us? So we got the product designer to create this model in about 2 hours. We sent it to the printer. We put it in the shop. They bought it a couple of days later. And then we got all of these pictures back of people rooting their own wigs and creating things. They were also creating clothes for each other. They were putting competitions on the forum, so they were kind of challenging each other to do certain things, making patterns, sharing patterns. So, and we were kind of standing on the sideline going, well, they're doing all of this stuff. They're kind of doing it for themselves. It's not really about us anymore. It's about just responding to the things that they want. One of the hardest things to do, so Makies were originally printed in the UK, so they were 3D printed in London underneath a dentist, because we couldn't find enough printers. So we have to use quite a small printer, and there were only a handful in the UK, and the people who were printing on them were used to making things for aerospace, for architects, for pieces of cars. They weren't used to making dolls. So when we went to them and said, can you make these please? They kind of laughed us out of the place. And so we eventually found this dentist, and he said, I'm printing medical stuff, I'm printing jaws, I'm printing various medical things, but I can squeeze your dolls in and around these things and we can start printing them. So that really helped us. And then when it came to making clothes, we were really trying to maintain the local thing. So we didn't want to go to China and say, we want 2,000 of these little T-shirts and 2,000 of these jeans. We tried to do it in the UK. And that, for me, was one of the most interesting aspects, because I found myself wandering around in kind of estates in London looking for people who made clothes, and there were just so many interesting people that I met and things that I learned about manufacturing in the UK. So one of the myths is that we don't make anything anymore, and actually we do make quite a lot. It's just more expensive. But it was really cool to kind of go into these workshops and see hundreds of people making clothes for ASOS, making clothes for various high street labels, and that was cool, because as far as I was concerned, we don't do that anymore. Well, actually, we do. So we found a little factory in East London, and a lady there called Jenny, who was really helpful, and said, we want to make these tiny clothes. And she just said, oh, none of my girls, because it was all ladies, are going to want to do that. They'd rather make an evening gown than make something like this waistcoat and this shirt, because it's so hard to do. So I had to talk her into it. And then she started, and she would do sort of minimum runs of 30. And since then, we've taken on a pattern designer, a graduate, who now works in-house, and she sits and designs the patterns and makes the clothes for us. So we can almost say that it's made in the UK, apart from the 3D printing, which is in Holland. But it makes me really proud to be able to say that we are making dolls in London, because I don't think that's happened for hundreds of years. It does mean that they're really expensive, but we're doing it, and that's good, and we're trying to get the cost down. I think one of the things that's really difficult is when now that we're kind of talking to mainstream kind of people who haven't been on the journey with us as much, it's very hard to explain about why one of these might cost £85 when they can go and get a Barbie for 20 or for 15. It's really hard to explain, this is handmade, it's hand assembled. It's a difficult story to tell, and we're still trying to work out how to do that. The other half of the business model is you have a toy that you've designed yourself, but you also have a game. So you create your avatar, you go into a game world, and you hold the toy as well as playing the game online and playing it on your iPad. And so the game is coming in the next, probably in about August. But that kind of completes the story for us. We've used storytelling quite creatively. So one of the biggest problems for us was that we couldn't get the skin color right. It took us 6 months, maybe a little bit more, to get skin color right. So we just had bone white dolls, which was interesting because people responded to them as kind of little porcelain dolls because they're quite heavy. They're also quite warm compared to normal dolls. So normal dolls, when you hold the plastic, it's quite cold, it's light. When you hold one of these, they're slightly heavier. But we couldn't get this colouring right, and so we thought, how can we tell this? It's very hard to talk about, why can't people want skin colours, and we couldn't give them. So we created this story for Christmas of the 3 Makies that went to the Arctic in search of colours, and they met a Makey Yeti, and they had this huge adventure, and we kind of wrapped it up in this ridiculous narrative. And then eventually, after Christmas, we got colour. This is the kind of reality of what we were doing, but that was quite boring. So we didn't tell it in that way. We told it with Yetis and kind of fake James Bond characters and all that kind of stuff. So this was another barrier for us. None of the team had ever done retail. So by the time we got to this point, which was December 2012, you can see how fast this all went. We had a pop-up shop in London for a week. We had 3 weeks to set it up, and none of us had any retail experience. We still had nobody with any product experience, like real product experience, so we just did it as best we could, which is kind of, I'm sure you lot understand, because you make films, you just kind of do it the way you think it should be done. So we printed 50 dolls, we stuck them in the shop. I think we'd had one user testing session with some kids where they'd held dolls, but this had been a year before, so we didn't know what was going to happen. And we had, I don't know how many people we had through, quite a few, but it was really interesting because most of the adults that came in, unless they collected dolls, walked in and said, "Oh my God, this is really creepy. This is freaking me out." They didn't like it at all. Anyone under about this height that came in looked at them all and said, "I want all of these." And so we were really confused by that. We were like, well, adults think they're creepy, kids think they're amazing. Adults have to buy them. Is this going to work? We're still trying to work that out. But we did a little bit of user testing. So we do tons and tons of testing. And what we found is that adults often respond to dolls in that way. So some of the best-selling dolls in the world, adults will say, "That's really creepy, I don't like it," or "It's ugly," and kids will love it. Really interesting, but because we weren't doll people, we had no idea, so we had to kind of learn the hard way. So this is where we are now. We are playing around with retail. So we're talking to some of the bigger retailers in London about trying out the retail experience, trying to sell the dolls through a shopping experience, a kind of experiential experience. So, you go in with a parent or, maybe a husband and wife will go in and they'll create it together. And what we found is that really works. And it's the model that's used for Build-A-Bear or American Girl. You kind of go in and you experience it. And we've also developed an iOS app. So we've had lots of support from Apple. One of the best moments of the last 18 months was going into a meeting with Apple, explaining what we were trying to do, showing them the dolls, and their response, which was, "Oh my God, I feel like I'm having a meeting in the future." We were like, whoa. We were a bit sort of dumbstruck because we were walking in, me and my colleague Luke, with dolls, just kind of go, "Please support us." And they loved it, and so they featured us. And we pushed the app I think it went live about 3.5 months ago. And we've had getting close to 200,000 downloads now. We're finding that before we pushed the app, it was really big in the UK and in Europe. We were getting about sort of 10%. And now that we've gone into North America, it's about 50-50 which is really interesting. So the uptake in North America is good. We're really happy with that. And we're in the process of developing a game. And that in itself is quite interesting, because when you have a toy, you tend to create a narrative and a world for them to live in. When you have a toy that someone designs for themselves, how far do you take that narrative? Like, do you predefine it, or do you let them write it? And if you let the audience write the whole thing, how do you bring it all together? And so with a lot of toys, it's about building in collectability, but if every single one is different, how do you make things collectible? And how do you get people to kind of bring those stories together? So we're struggling with some of that. And I think what we want to do is not put some constraints in there so that they feel like they understand the world that they could live in, but not dictate that too much. And I'm not sure how that will go. We'll see. And so we're looking now to work with publishers and broadcasters to kind of put the IP across lots of different platforms and see what works. So maybe comics, maybe games, maybe TV, maybe animation. We'll see. So if you like what you see, download it, have a look at the website, see what you think. We have now got 300,000 digital Makies. We've got about 500 actual Makies that you can hold all over the world. And we're about to go into the high street. So hopefully you'll see us when you go shopping.